Today's episode of Passionate Talk is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audio download and 30-day free trial at books.passionatetalk.com. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Get your 30-day free trial and free audiobook at books.passionatetalk.com. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Passionate Talk. I am your host, Gary Karp, and this is episode number 44. My conversation today is with Todd LeBouef and Joanne Bisesi. They are the hosts of the brand new podcast, The Shadow Self. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the shadow self is and why it's important to acknowledge it. They're going to talk about their journeys of discovery with the shadow self and why it was important for them to have this podcast. So right now, I want you to sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, maybe some tea, and get ready to listen to my conversation with Todd and Joanne. So why don't you tell our listeners why you're here today? I know why you're here, but I think the best way of starting this discussion is to tell them what you're doing here. You're getting ready to launch an endeavor that is going to take you on a journey you're going to love. You're getting ready to launch a podcast. And let me tell you, it's got to be a labor of love. And I know I've spoken to Todd a couple of times. He's been on the show in the past, and we've had discussions off, and he is an extremely passionate person. And Joanne, I know you sound like you're a very passionate, full of life person yourself.
Yeah, that's correct.
And these things are going to serve you well as you move forward, because let me tell you, the journey you're going to take is going to be wonderful. And I'm very excited for you guys that you actually decided to do this, because the topic you're going to be covering, I think, is really, really important. So why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners what this podcast is going to be about?
This podcast is going to be about the shadow self. In my 20 years training and experience, and probably even further back if we really think about it, we have a shadow self. We all have a darkness within us, but in most people, we're always going towards just the light and always addressing the light or the joy or the goodness. We don't look at the fact that we wear masks and we're in the shadow self, and that we have to address the darkness, and some people quote unquote evil, or where does that come from? So Todd and I have been collaborating and putting together that we are going to address the shadow self. We want to help guide you, take the mask off, layer by layer, address your shadow self, get into it. We're not afraid of it. We want to jump right in and work with that part of you.
You know, and that is very important. I know I've been living in the holistic metaphysical community for the last, let's call it 10 years or so, working as a life coach, working as a tarot reader, doing the heavy lifting work to help people and empower and inspire them. And the one thing that I've discovered is this concept or this feeling in the metaphysical community of namaste. The God in me welcomes and honors the God in you, and everything is sunshine and rainbows. And unfortunately, that's not the truth.
That's exactly where.
And
yes.
Go. Don't
That's
be afraid to cut me off.
That's what Todd and I have been discussing, and Todd jumped right in here with me. That's not true. And there's just so many out there that are living in this rainbow fantasy world of that you have to get pissed off at some time. Do not tell me that you do not get angry, that you do not have some part of you that gets angry. Show that anger, because without that anger, you're not going to have happiness. Without that, not even use the word hatred for some. I don't like the word. I don't want to use it, but you have to, because you're not going to feel incredible unconditional love if at some point it did not cross your mind to have that emotion. We have to have balance. And bringing me in as a female, Todd and I have discussed this, these female movements, this goddess, all this stuff. Okay, you know what? The man is not bad. The man has a shadow self as well. We have to bring balance. We have to have God, goddess. We have to have yin, yang. And that's how it's a very strong balance. Let's bring the world and the shadow self and the light and the dark together to bring the balance.
And that's actually really, really true. And There's a book by Neil Donaldson Walsh, by the name Conversations with God. It's a wonderful book. If you've ever read it, great. If you haven't read it, I suggest that you pick it up. It's a wonderful book that explains life, the universe, and everything, where the answer is in 42. And one of the things he talks about in that book is the divine dichotomy, which is the concept of yin yang, if you want to bring a Buddhist spin on it, which is you cannot know light unless you know dark. That for everything there is an opposite. And I know the first time I heard of the concept of the shadow self was from Carl Jung. And he is one of my favorite psychologists. And I happen to subscribe to a lot of what he studied and a lot of what he taught. And it is very important that we don't deny that part of us, because it is a part of us. And all we're doing by denying that and pushing those negative feelings down, because we have to be love and light and namaste, is doing ourselves a huge disservice.
Todd, jump in here, because that's where we're going with this. we know where to speak. We know you're out
Todd,
there.
I know you're out there, buddy. I know you could speak.
I would like to add, though, until we recognize that we do have a shadow self, that we're stuffing all of those emotions and traumas that we have experienced in our lives through since childhood, that until we recognize that we have a shadow self and we have to work our shadow self, it comes out in our behavior and how we treat people. So that is a huge wake up for me, in that different people that I have been around in my life, and including myself too, is until we admit that we have a dark side or a shadow side, it comes out in our behavior and how we treat others.
And that is true. I think the phrase I always hear is, "What you resist persists," and that is absolutely true, not only in the physical world, but in the metaphysical, spiritual realm as well. If you are ignoring a part of you, then that part of you is going to come out eventually. You could push it down and you can bottle it up, but eventually that dam is going to break. And when it breaks violently. It really does.
Exactly. And what's happening is the shadow self becomes the director of our show of our lives, and it is controlling the movie camera of how we're interacting, with people and the decisions that we make in our lives. So it's really important to really take a look at the shadow self and work through all of those, the aspects of the shadow.
Now, Joanne, you said earlier when we were doing this introduction that throughout your, I think you said 20 or 26 years of experience, what exactly do you do? How did you get the experience in working with the shadow self?
I was a stuffer. I didn't want to see that there was any darkness. I just wanted to live in the rainbow world until I crashed. I went through some training, and I had the shadow self experience, was trained by in the Shambhala multidimensional healing, the 9 dimensions, 13 dimensions with John Artminch. And you have to work the shadow self very deeply and do the 13 dimensional training. And I'm like, oh, that's nonsense. We don't need that. Let's live in rainbow world. Let's always love and light. And I literally went through a physical, mental, emotional crash because I had been a stuffer. I didn't see what was happening. And I, like Todd and I discussed, when we get to the point where we can actually share it, I literally have pictures that I can show people how ill I was. Like every physical ailment, I was very heavy. Doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And it was literally a physically emotional attachment that was because I was a stuffer. I wasn't taking care of the shadow self. So once I worked it, was aware that, oh yeah, let's see that. Let's own responsibility for this. Let's see how my attitude adjusts once I take the responsibility for it. Oh, let's take that layer and mask off. Let's become my authentic self. It's such a difference in life. So it became a passion of mine to really help people. And I wasn't big on put me out there in hundreds of groups and let's be the big ocean. I just became a pebble and a ripple. And then Todd found me and said, oh no, Let's get you out there to see and talk to a lot more people.
So it sounds like, and I don't mean to interrupt, but you starting to talk about how you crashed and how you were a stuffer and you stuffed all those feelings down and those emotions down, and you
Mhm.
talked a little bit about how that hurt you in general terms as far as your weight and your mental state. Could you give us one example of that one area of your life, or one example that you were really doing more damage to yourself by stuffing down those negative emotions? How did that manifest specifically?
Um, Manifest specifically. I had uh, developed, I guess you would say, lymph nodes in my neck that nobody could figure out what they were. And they kept telling me I had lymphoma. I lost my voice. By the time they removed them, they were nothing. They ended up being totally clear. And finally, I found a doctor that agreed and said, um, it's the emotional component to not dealing with situations. And I was like, oh my God, somebody actually agrees with me. So it literally became like a life threatening thing. Like I lost my voice. I thought I had lymphoma. And I didn't.
And I think that's very, very important for the people that are listening, that when you deny the darkness or the bad feelings or the negative feelings, it does manifest itself in our physical lives. That stress that you feel every day is a physical manifestation of really being that stuffer that Joanne said she was. And it can have really, really bad consequences for your physical health. I mean, Joanne just told a story about how it affected her lymph node system, and she had to have them removed, and they came out clear, and no doctor could figure out what was going on until one doctor said, this is in relation to your emotional state. This is in relation to your stress. And I'm using the word stress because I don't want to get too metaphysical and airy fairy here. I want to bring it into really practical terms that people can sit there and go, oh my God, I see myself in that. Because so many people live in the rainbow bright namaste world, or they think of it and they go, well, that's just smoke and mirrors. That doesn't exist. So I want to use the word stress. I want to use the word anxiety. I want to use the word sickness, because if you are constantly and chronically ill, and if you have a chronic illness, whether that chronic illness is Crohn's or it's anxiety or it's depression, you may want to take a look at what the mental and emotional situation is in your life and address the darkness that you haven't been looking at. Now, Joanne, that was what happened physically for you. What was the moment when you said enough? What was the aha moment that led you down the path to really working on this and understanding it? What was your breakthrough?
When they told me I'd be dead in 24 hours.
That'll do it. Whoa, okay, back up. We're going to need to hear this story.
Yeah,
What happened with this?
I had a blood clot in my basilic vein. They said they had to pack me on ice. They didn't think it would be able to resolve it. Again, a manifestation of stress because I was the perfect wife, perfect mother, perfect everything. Um, in my mind, the mask that I wore. And they said I would be dead in 24 hours. And it woke me up to be like, oh my God, no, this has to stop. The mask has to stop. Everything has to stop. I have to take the mask off, own responsibility, change my attitude, and look at things a different way. And I've just had an undying passion to do this and work the shadow self and help others do that.
I am, for one, glad that you did get that wake up call and you took that moment and you ran with it. And then you decided to help others with it and help others recognize their own masks. And really, the only thing that's going through my head right now is the Billy Joel song, The Stranger. Right?
Yes. Oh, that's perfect.
Which is, we all have a mask that we hide away forever and we take them off and show ourselves when everyone is gone. Some are satin, some are steel, some are silk, and some are leather. They're the faces of the stranger, but we love to try them on. And
So true.
that is exactly what we're talking about. And I happen to be a huge Billy Joel fan. You know, you can't be born on Long Island unless you like Billy Joel. They kick you out of Long Island if you are not a Billy Joel fan. So that song really represents what we're really talking about. And Todd, you've been unusually quiet through this. So I'm going to ask you the same questions I asked to Joanna. And how did you start working with the shadow self? What was your moment of realization that you had to acknowledge and really accept that shadow part of yourself?
Well, I think I have been working with the shadow self unbeknownst to me, knowing that much about the shadow self until Joanne and I connected up and we had several conversations about the shadow self. And I think Joanne had mentioned to me, well, it sounds like you've already been working with the shadow self. And for me, it's more of the in the past podcast that I had with Gary, I discussed about being a small child with hearing challenges, and my dad always quipped that saying that children are to be seen and not heard unless spoken to, and I took that to heart, and it's like, shh, I have to be quiet. I can't be, I have a voice around authority figures, so that made me very intimidated with, being around authority figures. And it wasn't until about 4 years ago when I started my journey in Reiki and working with, myself and figuring out why I was repeating these same mistakes over and over and over in my life. Why did I attract these people into my life? And a lot of it was working with the shadow self in regards to that I had to be quiet. I did not have a voice, and I allowed that shadow self part of me to be in the director's chair and to direct that movie set, as if you will, of my life. And I realized, okay, it all began to click. The pieces of the puzzle started coming together, and it's like, okay, it's because of my shadow self, the dark side of things that I've shoved down inside that have got me to this point. And I got tired of being bullied and picked on, and I too had some health challenges that I believed it was emotional. I have had back challenges and thyroid issues and just an array of different health issues. And since I've started working with the shadow self, my health issues they've lessened a lot.
And I think that's very true, and I find that to be true in my life, and it's a universal truth that we will still make the same choices over and over again, and we will be approached with those choices to make until we learn the lessons that are right for
Exactly.
us. So we will continue to make those, and I'll put it in air quotes, bad choices that do not support us until we learn the lessons that we have to learn.
Exactly.
And it's very important that people recognize that, because once you learn those lessons are not going to go away. They're going to keep repeating and repeating themselves. It shows itself and it manifests itself in abusive relationships, whether you're a guy or a girl and you're involved in an abusive relationship. You will continue to choose the same partner until you look inside yourself and say, wait a second, why do I always do this? What is lacking in me that I need to deal with? What do I need to accept in myself so I can break free of this repetitive pattern and move on?
Exactly, and that's exactly what was happening with me. That repetitive and doing the same thing over. And why was I attracting all the same type of people? And I was a fixer. I had to fix people, and I realized that I cannot fix people. I can guide and be a good listener and guide people, but I cannot fix anyone but myself. So that's where the shadow self came in for me.
Okay, so now we heard a little bit about both of you guys' stories on the shadow self and the pain, the emotional and physical situations that you went through, and your aha moments that brought you out the other side. How did you two guys get together?
Well, Joanne and I were Facebook friends for a number of years, and Facebook friends sometimes are people you've already met, some people you have not met. And Joanne and I had not met yet. And I was part of a psychic and holistic fair last June, and I donated a gift certificate. They were doing a raffle, asking the vendors to donate, gifts or whatever they might, gift certificates, so on and so forth, as a raffle. And Joanne won the raffle. And so that's how Joanne and I met. I did a
So, Joanne, it was a Reiki session that uh, Todd was giving away?
Yes, that's what I want, a Reiki session from Todd.
Okay, so how was it? Todd has been on the show before talking about Reiki, and he's given us some wonderful stories. One of his stories is going to be a part of a book called Success Works, and he's been on the show talking about that. He's been on the show talking about Reiki. So, what was that Reiki session with Todd like? Give us the dirt.
It was wonderful. A lot of times when I have Reiki done, I can't relax to just trust. And with Todd, I could. I was very relaxed, total trust. And what came through in guidance and in relaxation was very accurate. The sensation, because if you understand Reiki, the sensation was there, the warmth, the love, the feeling. I had shingles earlier in the year, and he could sense that, and I literally felt like it was moving out of my body. I had it in my eyes, so he did a lot of work on my eyes, and it helped improve the eyesight. And literally, when I went back to the eye doctor, they did say that my eyesight had improved. In the bad eye, the left eye was the bad eye, and they
Wow.
actually said it was stronger, that the eyesight was stronger. So for me, that's a huge success story. And it was after his Reiki session, because I had a Reiki session in June with him, and the eye doctor visit was in July.
And so, that, folks, there's your endorsement. If you want to get some Reiki done, hit Todd up. Well, all that information is going to be on the show page, and I'm sure that Todd will give it to us at the end of the episode, so you can hit him up and get that Reiki. But let's go back to the podcast. Why a podcast? There are so many ways that you can get this information out, and so many ways.
Well, I had a session done by another colleague. It was a wonderful session. It was a vibrational type session, and she works with the vibration, removing things that no longer serve you, and she gives messages as well. And she had mentioned to me that she saw me working with men in the next 5 years. And I had a friend of mine and I went to meet with Joanne at her house, and just have some conversation and just be together. And we were kind of talking about that. And I had Joanne up in my office probably about a week after that. And meanwhile, between that time, I'm thinking to myself, my voice or my spirit guides kept saying, you should get the word out there about working with men, because of the divine feminine, being very strong at this point. Men are feeling displaced, and that I would help them balance their male and female energy. And basically, it was that when I mentioned that to Joanne about the balance, she was like, yes, it has to be about the balance, about men and women. So it all morphed from there. And I said, well, would you be interested in doing a podcast together? And Joanne jumped at the chance. So she's like, yes, I would love to do that. So I'm going to let Joanne take over from there.
Yes, I've been told also in the last year by two different, one by the same vibrational healer that Todd was, and the other by an inner voice coach, that I needed to come forward and do a podcast or something different. I had to come out more publicly. So when Todd suggested that, I was like, "Oh, I'm all over that. You're the third person that signs the deal for me. Let's go." And he was like, "Really?" He's like, "I have the perfect person." I'm like, "Okay, let's go. Sign me up." So here we are. And I'm excited about it. I think it's time, and I really think it's the balance. Personal opinion and spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, everything. Such a passion for it. I can't even put enough words on it. That again, the women's movement is out there, and obviously I am a woman, but you have to have the male balance. We cannot forget that the male is there, and they have to be um, the word that's coming to me is educated, but they have to be included. We can't exclude them. And the balance has to be brought in. And in order to do that for both male and female is let's address the shadow self. Let's get, excuse the language, but let's get rid of the bullshit. Let's address the shadow self. Let's get the anger out there. Let's clear it. Let's work with all the emotions. Let's work with everything that's there. Get rid of the mask and let's get back to our authentic selves, who we and what we are. And that's how we'll bring it in. I'm ready. Let's go.
First of all, I want to let you know that I am blushing over your use of the word bullshit. It offends my delicate sensibilities. But I think that I'm a firm believer that the universe will give you opportunities to become the person that you're choosing to become. And I always say that it'll drop bricks on your head until you get tired and stop letting the universe drop bricks on your head. And so it's a good thing that you actually recognize that when the third person came up to you and gave you the opportunity to use your voice and you said, okay, there's something here. Because usually it gets to the point where a cinder block, a safe, and maybe an airplane has to drop on me before I'll look up and go, really? Okay, I get it. Stop. And that's an important thing for everyone to recognize, that the universe will give you opportunities to become your perfect self. Whatever that perfect self is, it'll give you the opportunity to become who you choose to be.
Exactly. And, when two people have ideas and they put it out to the universe, like Joanne put her, thoughts out to the universe that I'd like to work more with the shadow self. And I put out to the universe that I would like to do some sort of podcast or something like that. And unbeknownst to each other, and we hadn't even met, just soon met, and the universe brought us together. I'm a firm believer.
That conversation with Joanne and Todd was wonderful. This podcast, The Shadow Self, A Journey Within, sounds like it's going to be a really intense podcast. Very deep and very, very helpful for everyone who wants to connect to their inner selves and live a more authentic life. Now, this podcast is going to debut on Wednesday. That's just a couple of days from now. So if you're interested in listening to that podcast, just head on over to iTunes on Wednesday and do a search for The Shadow Self. Of course, part 2 of this conversation with Joanne and Todd will also be airing on that same Wednesday. So that's going to be a big day. You're going to get a double dose of Todd and Joanne if you choose to. Well, folks, that's all the time I have for today. So until we meet again on Wednesday, follow your dreams and passions and manifest the life that you choose.